Welcome to the Creatives with AI podcast. I'm your host, David, and this is a show where we share insights about the future of artificial intelligence and how it will affect the lives of people working in the creative industries. In today's episode, I chat with Zara, Anita, Paul, and Aaron Morris, co-founders of Choppity.com. It's an AI video editing website for turning long podcasts, interviews, and speeches into short, shareable social media clips. In our conversation, we discuss AI's potential benefits and risks, its role in privacy and social media, and the responsibility of humans and corporations in using AI. We stress the importance of reevaluating our understanding of what it means to be human in this technology-driven world. We explore a variety of use cases and examples, such as influencing capitalism and government, how AI struggles with humor, predicting personal preferences, and the difficulty of detecting deepfakes. Zara and Aaron both have computer science degrees from Durham University and launched Choppity at the start of 2023. They're building the company in public, and they openly discuss their company's progress, challenges, and wins, and they release their revenue figures every week on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in that sort of thing and you want to watch a company being built from the ground up, you might want to give them a follow over there. Links to Zara and Aaron's profiles and social media will be in the show notes on our website at creativeswith.ai. And just before we dive in, I wanted to let you know that I've started this episode right in the middle of us chatting before we were due to formally start the podcast. I did this because when I was doing the rough edits, I thought there were some interesting things that came up during this part of the chat, so I just wanted to leave them in as is. So when you listen to it, you'll hear that I go back and then want to do the intros and stuff, but that is on purpose. So hopefully that's not too bugging, and you'll enjoy the conversation. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this casual conversation with Zara and Aaron.
Is there a specific direction that you're wanting to take the recording, by the way?
No, I don't. I didn't want to get too overly prescriptive with it. Do you know what I mean? I think with you guys, I just want to have a chat, because you're obviously involved, all the time in using AI and stuff like that. I think we can just have a general chat about it. I don't have like a massive list of questions prepared like I did for Yop yesterday. He was a little, prepared for that one, but he's like used to being interviewed by Forbes and Wired magazine and like proper journalists and stuff. So yesterday I was talking to a guy named Yop, and Yop is the founder of Pause AI, and he has a massive existential dread of what AI is going to bring and what it's going to do to society. And so he is genuinely very much worried that it is, has the capacity and the ability to wipe out humanity. And he's very worried about that. And he's been working on this thing for several years now. But yeah, he genuinely believes it, and he does get quite emotional when he talks about it sometimes. If even he admitted he started on the surface where he was quite, I think he just wound himself up about it and just really started to just get inside his own head. And, he was just kind of swirling around inside his own head. And he built up all this, like this is literally the end of humanity and we're all going to die and we've got to stop this now. And then I think he's kind of come back from that a little bit over time, where he's kind of stepped back from the edge a little bit, but he still has that. And sometimes when you talk to him, I've talked to him a few times now, and sometimes if he stays if you get him talking about it too long, he actually starts to become emotional about it again, which is quite powerful actually, that he really does feel it. And I said to him, first of all, it's important to have this discussion. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and I do think that it potentially has a lot more benefits than the negatives, but at the same time, there are risks, and we do need to, we need to look out for those, which is why I started the podcast in the first place. Yeah, it was a really interesting discussion. Most of the people in my personal network that I've talked to and said, I talked to this guy, it's the only episode that people have really engaged with. It kind of said, oh yeah, that's really interesting. I really want to hear that. So I might try and push that one out sooner than I would have, just because people seem to be really interested.
I'd be really keen to hear it, actually. I think it's the conversation around this, I'm finding conflicting and interesting. And I think that there's to a huge extent, I think the conversation around AI often absolves the responsibility of the humans who actually use it. And I actually think that that's quite problematic, because we talk about AI as if it's something that currently has a mind of its own and currently is autonomous, which it isn't. And the only reason that it's, stealing people's jobs and doing all these things is because that's how humans are using it, and that's how companies are using it. And I think that that's where the true problem lies, not with AI in and of itself. In the same way that, social media isn't problematic in and of itself. It's just the way that we use it, and it's just the people behind it who have, built it in specific ways that make it dangerous or use it in dangerous ways. But AI in and of itself is just, I don't know, a tool. Yeah.
It's something that I said to him yesterday, which is, it's people. I mean, at the end of the day, and this sounds terrible, but I have no confidence in the average human. Do you know what I mean? Just because most people, when pushed, tend to act in their own best interest, which necessarily isn't the interest of the greater good. And it's not, I don't judge people harshly or think that they're bad people because of that. I think that's just how humans are. But we have to understand that. And you're absolutely right. I think, we also talked about the fact that I think a lot of the people, there's this whole dual use issue, right? So everything can be used for good or it can be used for bad. You've got a knife can cut your food and it can help you eat and it can help you cut down trees and it can help you do all these things, but it can kill you as well. So it's all about how it gets used. And unfortunately at the minute, I think we're in a race to the bottom with some stuff. And I think what most people are worried about is, it's the military and defense and stuff like that who are using it. And I think that's what everybody's really worried about. And the potential for, it's the scale. If one person goes out, I mean, I could, we see this in the US all the time, unfortunately, but you get school shootings or, guys go off in a mall or like whatever, and they kill 10 or 15 people, but that's 10 or 15 people, not 10 or 15 million people. Right. And so it's a whole different scale.
But again, I mean, nuclear weapons give us the capability of wiping out the world as well. It's not like we haven't had access to these, super destructive technologies before AI. I think that to a certain extent, the mass fear with AI doesn't necessarily come from entirely what the capabilities of AI are today. A lot of it comes from a misunderstanding of what AI actually is and what we actually use it for. And probably also comes from, kind of sci-fi and stuff that people have seen and read about, this is what AI will look like in 50 years time when we don't know, no one knows.
Yeah, that's something else that we touched on yesterday. And it's one of the, it's funny that you mentioned it. It's one of the things that in the flow of the conversation, I forgot to mention it and to talk about it. But you mentioned sci-fi, which is quite interesting because I think there's two different versions. Well, there's three different versions, but the two main ones are Star Trek, which is, we've pretty much eliminated wars except with aliens. There's no money, right? Nobody wants for anything. You've never seen anybody use credits or buy anything or anything. It's just, if you need food, you go and a machine makes it for you. It's, it's a peaceful society. We live with technology. We live with robots. Robots have a little control thing on them so they don't get, start killing humans and whatever. And we all just kind of get along. And it's this utopian view. We've also got Mad Max, which I think is the other side. And then there's something in the middle, like you either get something like a cyberpunk kind of thing, which could work, or you get something like Dune. Dune's a quite interesting one where they literally killed all the computers that could think. So essentially they do have computers, but the only computers they have are like the ones we have today. So they don't have that problem solving capability because they nearly wiped out humanity. So we have a few different examples to work with. I personally like to think that we're on the Star Trek path, but we very well could be on the Mad Max path.
I think it just depends on what humans do with it. I came across the term of the singularity recently with regards to AI, that eventually we'll just reach that exactly that what you're saying. You don't really have a need for the issues that we currently have today by way of war, hunger. I mean, capitalism, I guess we could say as well. It just kind of gets removed.
Yeah.
It's no longer an issue.
Yeah, but then that's kind of another
Yeah.
point, actually, which is that if you're AI is so kind of entrenched in a capitalist system right now. It's what's driven its growth, actually, and its progress, and it's what's continuing to kind of, support it, really. It's the fact that we're paying for it. It's the fact that people can profit from it. And I feel more and more like, even though we're understanding the kind of true consequences of capitalism, it's a system that's going to be harder and harder for us to break away from, especially as people stand to earn so much from technology nowadays. I think that, again, you were talking about the scale of AI, and yeah, I think the scale just gets blown out of proportion when you've got AI. Suddenly your costs are massively reduced, and the number of people that you can reach is also huge, and the amount of work that you can do is massive as well.
But then I wonder whether or not that would lend itself to capitalism, because I guess at some point you could reach that race to the bottom where actually for a government it's beneficial to be able to provide food, high quality healthcare, technology, etc. to their citizens. And once you have that, actually that's quite important.
Excuse me.
And there won't necessarily be space for capitalism to thrive. You could see it more along the lines of universal basic income and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but then how often do you see governments being the ones that are pushing for, pushing technological progress? It's usually companies and private organizations, not governments. And in fact, governments tend to be really behind when it comes to any kind of technological advance, which is problematic in different ways. But they're definitely not at the forefront of innovation.
Yeah, it's been interesting having worked with public sector. So one of the contracts I do is with Oxfordshire County Council, and I work with their innovation hub. And it's been interesting to really get a better understanding of the types of things that government have to worry about that technologists don't. So, you get a lot of creative people who will go out and they'll create all sorts of really cool new toys and things because they can. The example I've used before is Waze. Waze was an amazing tool when it came out because the basic idea, which seems fine on the surface, is, we just want to give people a different way to avoid traffic. So if there's a shortcut they can use, or if they can cut through this little side street or something, then, that can get them around this traffic jam and they can get where they're going faster, which again, on the surface sounds great for people. But there was no consideration given to the fact that those side roads are not engineered and they're not built to handle that level of traffic that's now going down them. And it's not just about the fact that the people that live on the street have to deal with more cars. It's about the fact that the actual road surface was not designed for big trucks and all that. It's designed for light traffic in a neighborhood. And so all of a sudden, when you start having loads of traffic going down, it's creating tons of extra wear and tear. The road bed and the road surface is not designed for that. So all of a sudden, you're now negatively impacting the infrastructure, which is actually very expensive to go back and repair, because you just thought it would be a good idea to direct a bunch of people around, which on the surface, it seems fine, but it's actually not. And so now you've got governments going in and putting in the, what they call low traffic neighborhoods. And in the low traffic neighborhoods, it's great for the people who live there. And it's also great for the government because it sort of gets the traffic back down to the level that it was engineered for in the first place. But now not everybody, but the drivers who are used to being able to take all the shortcuts now are up in arms and saying, you can't close these roads off because it's really inconvenient. It's like, yeah, but you were never supposed to drive there in the first place, which is actually an interesting segue into what you guys are doing. So we've had a long rambling conversation here at the beginning. And what I'll probably do is maybe we'll do the little intro bit here now, and then I can take that and cut that in to the front. and then it'll seem a little bit more, and then we'll get into all the stuff we've been talking about. I'll just move that further back in the podcast. So maybe if we do that, then we can keep going, if that's all right. Well, I knew that would happen. But this is the fun of talking to people that I know, right? Like, you know, we had an opportunity to spend a few hours together, right, at the podcast show and stuff. And so it makes it much easier to talk to you guys than, you know, talking to someone who I've spent 15 or 20 minutes doing an intro call with. So that's why I kind of like just chatting. So I've got Zara and Aaron here today, and we met each other at the podcast show in London a few months ago. And you guys have a tool that called Choppity. And Choppity is a way to, I'm going to do a ham-fisted way of explaining it, and I'm going to let you do it in just a second. But it's a way to automatically, to use AI to create clips.
Yeah. So it's specifically for video podcasters to make marketing clips from their podcast episodes.
If you do it manually, then you kind of usually have to listen to, let's say, an hour-long podcast, go through, find the interesting clips with AI. And once you transcribe a video, so you get all of the words that were spoken in the video, you can do that to a decent standard pretty much automatically. But then there's also just kind of like visual elements. So making sure you can change a landscape video into a portrait one by detecting faces, adding animated captions to improve engagement and accessibility, that sort of thing. So that's kind of what we're focused on.
I did promise that I would do this, and I would publicly shame myself, because I have said in the past that I use all the AI tools to help me produce the podcast and to do things like transcripts and to create clips, but I don't actually use Choppity. So I'm really sorry about that. But I am going to use it to create the clips from this podcast. So because I actually couldn't bring myself to use another tool. That would be hugely embarrassing, though. Because I can see you guys going, hang on, you've created clips, but you don't have an account? What's going on? So I promise I will use it.
We don't take it personally, don't worry.
No, it's all right. But I should do, right? I should, I do try and support all the guests that I have on the show where I can. So I should do that, and I will do that.
We should only support us if it's actually useful for you. We don't want you to waste your time and money on something which is worse. And that's not useful for us either, because then we just think we have a good product, but we don't.
We're actively trying to bring value. We're not just trying to take your money.
No, that's fair enough. But I'm still, and I said this the other day, and I know I said it to you earlier, but I'll say it again. It is ironic that I run a podcast talking about, you know, how AI is going to impact the creative industry, and yet I use all the AI tools possible so that I don't have to hire someone, and I can do all this myself. So
actually, I think that that's one of the areas in which AI is incredibly beneficial, which is that it's kind of democratized access to technology to a bunch of individuals who otherwise wouldn't have the resources, the time, or the money to be able to create things. So I think that kind of touches on, you know, the primary benefit of AI, really, which is for the individual.
Yeah. Still, it is ironic that that's what I talk about and that's what I do. I'm hoping, though, that I will get to the point where AI tools are good. And I guess this is a good way into the discussion, maybe, is what I found is that AI tools are good for a lot of things, but they still only do about 80% of the work. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm curious, that actually leads me to a specific question I have for you guys. So when somebody uses your tool, for example, would I upload the whole video and then you guys your tool would set off and go and find the clips itself? Or do I need to identify where the clips are and then I upload them to your tool and then it does something with them from there?
So at the moment, you upload your full podcast episode, and then we've deliberately taken the approach of AI suggestions as opposed to AI does it for you. And the reason for that is exactly what you said. Like, AI does 80% of the work, but you still need that human to do that last little bit. And oftentimes an AI will find something that a human might not necessarily think of as being, you know, the perfect section. And so currently what we do is you upload your video and we'll suggest some clips for you. And then the user has the option to manually change the start and end times, or to manually just select a whole new clip if they're not happy with what the AI chose. And that applies for all of the other bits that the AI does as well. Specifically, we want to maintain as much flexibility as possible for the user whilst doing, the bulk of the work.
The heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about how the AI determines what's interesting. How does that, is that something that you have to tell it? So this is kind of getting into the, a little bit about how it works. And if you've got special IP, then fine, you don't have to share that. But just in a general sense, how does it figure out, or how does it come up with a list? Because, there are other tools like the recording platform that we use, Riverside. Riverside does that as well. But I've asked them a million times, how does it find the clips? And nobody seems to know. So is it still very much a black box, or have you trained it to find stuff? And does it, that's a better follow-up question. I'll stop there and then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, so it's a great question. In fact, so I can't really go into exact specifics of how it works, because that's kind of one of the most useful and I guess I would say defensible things that anybody who does this kind of work has. However, I can explain some kind of ideas as to how you could do it. So let's say you were trying to find something which is funny. Funny is really difficult. How on earth do you train an AI to figure out what's funny?
Yeah.
It doesn't even, you might first think, oh, well, if people are laughing, that might mean that was a funny thing, right? And that's an easy thing. Sure. But then often in times, people aren't laughing. And in fact, tone might be useful. If something is said with a certain intonation, that might be funny. But that doesn't work either, because you have deadpan comedians who say hilarious things with straight faces. So that doesn't work either. Then you can kind of think about, okay, well, what about actual sentence structures? What kind of words tend to be funny? That, again, in and of itself, words alone don't tend to be funny. So you need to look at them in terms of sentence structures. And one thing which you can think of which might work slightly better is that when you think about what makes something actually funny, usually there's a punchline or some kind of context, which means that you betray expectations, is kind of how I would talk about it. So, for example, if you have a sentence which is "the sky is," most people would think that the next word is blue, but actually, if you say red, then you could argue there's an element of humor in there, right? So it's a very simplistic example to explain how you can see that things which are not expected could be funny or interesting or insightful. So that's kind of like a roundabout way that I would explain how you could go about doing this sort of thing.
I understand. That totally makes sense. Then my next question is, if someone's a customer or on the platform in general, if it goes and makes recommendations and then people choose some and don't choose some, do you use that in the training set so that the AI starts to learn what's funny in certain clips and what's not funny? Because if people don't choose them, then that's a sort of a no. And if they do it, then that's a reward, right? So then they get a yes. So then it's rewarding the algorithm to maybe try and find more that are similar. And so first of all, I guess the question is, does it do that on a global basis? And then second of all, I guess the question is, does it do it on an individual customer basis? So if I'm a customer and you're making I'm uploading videos, you're making recommendations, I'm going, yeah, I like that one. No, I don't like that one. Is it training also for my individual account so that it starts to work out what I personally find funny versus what maybe everybody on the platform finds funny?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in short, right now, actually, no. And one of the reasons why is because we're in the early stages of being, we're a startup. And the difficulty is if you imagine that you actually do go about doing that and you record all of the things that people actually export and do choose and select. And like you say, you have this reward, rejection side of things. You actually need a huge data set. A massive data set to be able to really start to infer anything from that. Again, you could potentially see that, okay, this one individual tends to find things, or select clips which are, which contain certain words or certain ideas. But even within that, you won't necessarily know unless you ask, why is the reason that you selected this? It could actually be that in one clip, I'm talking about my dog Hubert, I don't know. And that's a funny clip. And in another one, it's about how my dog Hubert died, and that's a sad clip. And maybe that's why I chose it, or maybe that's explicitly why I chose not to incorporate it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree, and it's something that's useful. It's just slightly more difficult and nuanced than you would kind of hope for.
Okay. It's just I was just curious. You're absolutely right. I mean, you could take the simple phrase, my dog died, right? My dog died could be the punchline to a joke that's actually really funny, or it could be super sad because your dog died.
Exactly.
Right.
And again, in both cases, you might want a really sad and emotional clip, and that might be what you want to use to market.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's difficult task.
Yeah, I imagine. It's similar. I spent a lot of my career working in sort of digital advertising and data analytics and looking at things like sentiment analysis. So this is very similar. It's sort of probably a sister technology really to the sentiment analysis and trying to understand, it used to be, I mean, this is a well-trodden path now, but in the beginning, people trying to understand, what does someone mean when they say something on Twitter, for example? And, trying to understand sarcasm, just, it doesn't work. Like I've talked to okay, go back a step. So in one of the things that you do, obviously in government is you survey the public a lot. And so a lot of those surveys come back and they have open text fields where people can write in answers. And recently there was a very large one that ran, I probably shouldn't say where it was, but there was a large one that ran, they got like 25,000 responses. And there were 14 open text fields that they had in the questionnaire all the way through. And they had to somehow analyze all of this. And I was talking to them about, maybe trying to come up with a way to do it and maybe using AI or some of the machine learning tools to do it. And they said that they had spoken to some of the companies who do that analysis, and literally the company said, we don't work with any UK customers because people in the UK are so sarcastic that we can't ever determine whether they're actually being serious or not. And so our tools don't work.
Oh my gosh.
That makes sense.
That does make sense. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think about Brexit? I love it.
Exactly.
Okay, what direction is that in?
Yeah. And
best thing that ever happened.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I actually did a piece of research work, and just that was internally, and I probably should do it fully. We just did a very small sample, because out of 25,000, you can take a fairly small sample that's representative of the whole group. But what we were trying to do is they also had a lot of questions where you rated it on a scale, sort of 1 to 10, let's call it. And so confusingly, sometimes 1 was bad and sometimes 1 was good. But anyway.
On the same survey?
Yeah, within the same, not the same question, but one question might be rate it 1 to 10, at 10 being good and 1 being bad. And then another question later in the survey would say, rate this 1 to 10, whereas 1 would be good and 10 would be bad.
Oh, shit.
So
why?
You had I don't know. It was done by committee. I don't know. So first of all, you had to adjust for that. So then you had to go and flip them all around so that they were all on the same sort of thing. And then you had to look at, anyway, but what I was looking at was, could you adjust? Could you find sarcasm by looking at the ratings that they'd given to other questions? And let's say if 80% of the ratings they gave were negative, and then they have a positive, I love it, then that probably would mean that it was sarcastic, because it didn't match with the rest of the answers. And that was the only way. And we weren't confident that it was accurate enough. But, I'm not that smart. I'll say that straight away. I'm not that smart. So I assume that somebody who works for a company that does sentiment analysis would have tried that already, and it must not work. But I did find it really interesting that they just said, our tools don't really work for the UK.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that people answer surveys in a sarcastic way, You think of sarcasm as being a kind of social tool, you know, a way of interacting with other people, not a way of interacting with a form or a survey. So that's, yeah, I find that interesting.
You would probably be appalled if you saw
Really?
some of the responses, particularly for public inquiries. You know, and it's been really interesting to work on sort of that side of the fence. Like I don't actually work for the council. I help them with some business planning and things like that. So I don't have anything to do with policy or any of that. But it's been really interesting to kind of get a feel for, you know, you literally can't make anybody happy any of the time. And it's hugely frustrating because no matter how much you want to do a good job or you're trying to do what you think is the right thing, you know, half the people are going to disagree with you. You know, even if you say we want free medicine, you know, we want free medical care for everybody under the NHS, there's still a small group of people who think that that's totally the wrong thing to do and will tell you that you're doing it wrong. Right? Like there's no universal agreement on pretty much anything. And that makes it really difficult. And so we should probably bring the conversation back around to AI before we lose people in the conversation. But this is the challenge that I guess you guys have, again, at trying to identify the clips. And it's a challenge that we're going to have, I think, across AI tools in general, is how it can interpret what people are saying to actually understand what they really want, and then to be able to take an action around that. So I can see how that could be really difficult.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. Actually, a startup that I was working with a while ago, they are working in privacy, but in individuals' privacy. So you can, for example, let's say I'm a Twitter user and I'm, you know, Facebook, Instagram, and I have all of these different social accounts and my blog. Just based on activity, you can infer quite a lot about a person. So if I like this post by, you know, a certain person, then I might share a certain worldview. And if I do that repeatedly, and you can kind of, if you have a big enough data set and you really track all of this stuff, you can really infer a lot of information about people. And it's kind of a similar thing where using AI, using the same kind of AI and the same inference techniques that you would use, you can flip it the other way around and actually make it so that it's very difficult to know anything about you. For example, let's say you liked, you know, a post by a certain person of a certain political view, then you just go and like one of somebody from the complete opposite point of view, and it becomes very difficult to know what your actual worldview is. Of course, the easiest way is to just not be online at all and to never say anything, but that's also quite difficult.
It is. What's interesting about that is I think there's potential that the whole AI thing, you know, when you start thinking about fake news and deep fakes and all that sort of stuff, is actually going to ruin social media for everybody. And everybody's just going to get to the point where you can't believe literally anything that you see or hear. And so it will mean, and I think it's happening already, is people are just stopping using it because all it is ads and a bunch of fake stuff. It's kind of lost the real humor and the real contact with real people that it had in the beginning. And I think people are moving away. Like my son doesn't do any social media at all. None, not any of it. He and his mates use WhatsApp to chat with each other, to make plans and things like that, but they don't just chat all the time. And he uses Discord because they play games together. So they use it more like a telephone than anything else. So he doesn't just sit on there and chat with people all day. They literally come together. They all get online. They play a game together. They use Discord to do the voice chat bit. And that's it. And then that's all he does. And I know loads of his friends are the same way. So I think we've got a generation, you know, coming behind that don't really use those tools because they just don't see the value in it, which is really, which will be an interesting wrinkle to see how that pans out. When you were talking though, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So about that, I actually have a somewhat half formulated thought when it comes to, if you think about governmental broadcasts on TV and things like that, right? At what point does it become the state that you don't know whether or not it has just been hacked and deepfaked, and you have no idea whether to trust it? And I wonder, and again, this kind of converges on the idea of singularity and convergence of AI, but text is the easiest thing to fake. Images are slightly harder, but also we've got them pretty damn well, doing it pretty well already.
It's pretty easy now.
Yeah, and then video is harder to fake. That's still quite easy to detect right now. Not 100% accurate, especially if you have kind of abnormal movement and things like that. It's quite easy to detect when a video is real, and at least to the very least not 100% generated. But I wonder if, as the kind of computational power and complexity needed to fake something gets more and more difficult, the more trustworthy it can get. So whether or not we will start seeing completely 3D broadcasted virtual reality, whatever full-on sensory experiences, which again could be faked but are just so hard that it might be more trustworthy, and whether we might see things like that happening.
Yeah, it could be. You know about The Mandalorian, right? Instead of when they filmed The Mandalorian, instead of using green screens, they used LED screens in the background.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And you can't even, you can't tell.
Right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they do, there was just I think a Mercedes-Benz commercial that was done in Unreal Engine 5.
Cool.
That you can't tell wasn't film. It's like photorealistic, which is really interesting as well. And I've talked to a couple of people in the film industry, and they've mentioned that the technology that's been used traditionally for gaming is now becoming accessible, and it's so good that you literally can't tell it apart from film. So it's not even CGI. It's a whole different thing that's even better and really difficult to tell apart. When you were talking a minute ago about looking at people's profiles online and stuff, when we were at the show, I can't remember if we talked about this, but did I tell you about the guy that I knew who had the technology that could look at the photos on your phone?
No, I don't think so.
Right. So okay. So I know a guy, and this company isn't operating anymore, as far as I know. But I saw his pitch at a startup event in Italy, and he came up with the idea because he worked for the tourism department in Israel, and there are two main tourism industries in Israel. One is religious tourism, obviously, because like every religion in the world is there pretty much. But the other one is actually gay tourism. And their challenge is you don't really want to mix those audiences up, because there's generally speaking, there's not much crossover between the two, right? Generally speaking. I know I'm treading on dangerous territory here, but generally speaking, they're different audiences. And so you don't want to serve the wrong type of ad when you're trying to target the content. And I'll keep the story as short as possible, but basically he worked out that what they created was a software kit, an SDK that any company could insert into their own app. And what it would do is they could analyze the photos on your phone that were in your photo roll. It never sent any information back to the company. It did everything on the handset. So there was no privacy concern about them actually seeing a photo. Like they couldn't even download the photo even if they wanted to. But what they could do is they could analyze the photos, and they could tell with like 99.9% surety which one of those two camps you fell into. But then he realized that they could do like 200 different attributes as well.
Sure.
To a very, very high level of surety. So they could tell if you had a pet. They could tell what kind of pet it was. Was it a dog or a cat? Were you married? Did you have kids? Where did you live? Where did you go on holiday? Like, what was your socioeconomic level? Like, where did you live? Like, all of this information they could find out. And so what they did is they did the analysis. They created a profile that was just numbers. And then they could share that with the advertisers could use that profile to then target ads to you based on your profile. And again, they didn't send the information off to the advertiser. It was all done on the handset. But that's a situation where they can look at images just that you take, and they can just tell from the pictures that you have on your phone 200 different attributes about you, your religion, whether you're gay, like all these really personal type things they could do pretty much straight away, immediately, which is pretty scary.
Yeah, and I guess that also it's interesting because that's where I think the question about regulation really comes into play, because exactly as you said, right, in order for them to be able to process that data remotely, or for them to be able to process it away from your phone, they would definitely have needed to, ask for permissions or whatever. But the fact that they're able to do that legally on your local device.
Yep.
Is it legal?
Yep.
I think it is because so
interesting.
Yeah.
Even with GDPR, right, it's actually only if you can be able to form a profile. But if you're just using it in order to serve ads where you don't actually come in touch with any of that data, the data is basically it's being used without you actually having access to it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yep. And
that sounds fishy to me.
It sounds fishy, but I think it sound completely legal as well.
It depends on what you call the data, because actually, if it's just the images and it's, you can't transfer the images. But actually, if anybody can infer things from those images, that's still part of the data that's contained.
But they don't have access to it.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is that it's all on the person's device where those photos already are. It's not leaving. It's not going anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, none of us are lawyers. Just want to throw that out there. Don't take our advice on any of this. And if he listens, I am still connected to him on LinkedIn and spoke to him not too long ago. I won't use his name or the name of his company because I don't think it's actually running anymore. And I don't know why that was or what happened. So it could have been that it turned out that legally they had problems or ran into problems or something. I don't know. But I do know at the time that it was working and that they can do that. And so, when you put that in the context of trying to build a profile around somebody and then having an AI being able to, like a custom AI, if, they've talked about having personal assistants and things like that, that you could put on your phone, that you'd be able to have an AI to talk to, and you could just say, hey, do this for me, book a reservation, find me a holiday, whatever. Knowing that if the AI just had access just to your photo roll on your phone, it could instantly know 200 or 300 things about you that maybe you didn't even realize. Yeah. And it could start to give you content and do things that would fit with your personality because it knows about you. And you would just look at that and go, how the hell does it know all this stuff? And all it did was that's just your photo roll.
Yeah.
Like, what if AI has access to everything else as well?
But I mean, I think individuals have been doing this for ages, just inference attacks. And just to be a little bit meta, you said you're not going to give us the name of this person or this company. I don't know either, but you did say that you're connected on LinkedIn. And I don't think it's going to be hard. It wouldn't be hard for me to find that.
If you want to sift through the 5,000 or 6,000 connections I have on LinkedIn and try and work it out.
But hey, it's always a question of a person, whether or not a person who's motivated enough could do it.
100%. Yeah.
I don't think the threshold's that high.
I don't think actually he would really care if I did say his name, but I won't just
bring him on the show
just in case. Well, you say that it's a really good point. And I think what would be interesting potentially to talk to him about is essentially what's the difference between what he was doing and what people are calling AI at the minute. Because really all he was doing was machine learning. It was just a machine learning algorithm that went in and could analyze literally the pixels that were stored in the file to then recognize what that object was and then, what was in that image and then create a bunch of metadata about it and then analyze the metadata to come up with some sort of a profile. So it's a couple of different machine learning steps in there. But at the end of the day, that's what, people would call that tool an AI tool these days. But that's it was just a software SDK that you could put into your app to make your ad targeting more accurate. It's it's pretty crazy.
AI and machine learning, it's so very, misunderstood terms, I think, by most people. Everything pretty much turns into an if-else block if you look at it from high enough up. And it's just, it's all pretty much the same. But again, that's the same. I imagine it's the same as the human mind works. It's actually just an if-else block. There's no, It's just the way that you tune the weights and the biases and the parameters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's also where the conversation around kind of work theft becomes interesting to me, because, you know, you train kind of image generation AIs and text generation AIs on other people's work, but you also train yourself on other people's work. You know, you learn to read through reading texts that other people have written, and you learn to take photos through looking at photos that other people have taken. And, you know, I also think another good example of this is DJs. A lot of the time they'll use literal samples that have been created by other people and just stick it together to create something new that is then their own. At what point is it inappropriate to do that? And why is it that it's inappropriate for technology to do that?
Yeah, and furthermore, what does it have to say about consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
Well, exactly.
Kind of where it tends to go.
Every artist in the world, when you go to art school, you copy other artists.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. And this is what it gets back to. And I think I have this funny feeling that a lot of people like to think that humans are really complex and we're really complicated, and we're actually not. And I think this is what AI is actually really pointing out. And I think there's an interesting, I've got a psychologist who's going to come on, and I really want to dig into the psychology behind that, because I think you're absolutely right that AI is no different really than a person. But what it shows is how simple humans really are. Mm-hmm. And the fact that a few algorithms can essentially act the same and give the same responses or better than any average human can on any topic is, I think that's surprising to a lot of people. And I think it's slightly unsettling. And that could be part of the pushback that, you know, when people really dig into it, there's a little bit of a realization and some self-reflection, I think, that needs to happen. And everybody starts to go, wow, okay, like this is better than me at answering questions. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? And what does that mean for us? And what does that mean about being human? And I don't know, those are big questions, but, and I'm not, well, I guess I'm as qualified as anyone. You know, we're all qualified to answer those, but they're massive questions and something to think about. And I wonder if that just if that's part of the reason that people are so unsettled. I don't know. Yeah, what do you think?
I think when it comes to a question of, you know, people being worried about an AI being better than a human. I mean, we've had chess engines around for years, which are much better than every single human being on planet Earth.
Excel is much better than humans at doing maths for the most part.
But you still got to put traditionally, you still had to understand the maths to put it in. Like it could do the math, but you still had to know what to do. We're now entering an era where you don't even need to know what to do. I was at a book launch event and I was talking to someone and we were talking about AI for accounting. And it was their position that, you know, accounting's too complicated. There are all these little, you know, ways of going about doing things and sort of avoiding this. And, oh, well, I want to put that over there this time and not that time. And I said, okay. And I said, but the bookkeeping part of it, of, you know, recording transactions and doing all that stuff would be really, you know, pretty straightforward. And then she sort of stared off into space for a minute. And then she said, but wouldn't it be amazing if it would do my board reports for me and my shareholder reports for me and all the reporting and all the emails, that if it could just go in and then you could just see in her mind that she just started to go down the track of, oh, wow, what is all this stuff? Like it could just do the stuff for me that I hate to do all the time. And again, it's not going to write it perfectly the first time. But if it could compile all the numbers and get everything together, put it in a document, put it in a nice format, get all the charts and the graphs and the everything and do it all for you. And then all you have to do is basically, then you go back and you start going, okay, well, I don't want to show that. You know, you're the head of sales. You're like, I got to fudge this a little bit because I know that deal's coming in and I know, you know, and there's always a little bit of fiddling that goes on.
That brings up a really interesting point though, talking about what's perfect, because sure, the state of AI right now isn't necessarily perfect, but it's not far-fetched to see how it could become perfect, quote unquote. But in something like that, like where you need a creative accountant for whatever reason, that's a human thing, right? It's a human thing to some extent to want to be creative. But again, in the same way that a human has their own, weights and biases and things that they've learned in order to want to be creative in that way, there's no reason why you couldn't, again, train an AI to be perfectly imperfect in the same way.
Well, as you know, all AI has randomness built into it by default, because when it doesn't have randomness, it's not good. So there is a bit of chaos that has to be in the system intentionally, or it becomes not useful. The other side of that is, and one of the arguments that later in the conversation I pushed back with was, I said, yeah, but what if the AI is able to come up with strategies that you never would have thought of? Because it intimately knows all of the rules, all the laws, all the regulations, all the everything. So when it starts looking at your transactions and you think, oh, I want to set this up like this, and then I'm going to pay this in dividends, and I'm going to do it like that. And the AI comes back and says, well, no, actually, you should do it like this. And you reduce your tax bill by 40% and your personal tax, and you go, wow, I never would have thought of that, because it understands, it knows all the rules and can work out what's the most efficient way to work within the rules to get the desired income, which is to pay as little tax as possible. Maybe. You know what I mean? So that's where I think it could be really powerful, because it's like, I don't know. It's like, just like in any job, you have people that are better than other people, right? So, maybe you have someone who's been doing your books, or they've been doing it for a long time. Then you've got this guy who works for PwC and is like the leading accountant in the world. And, if they came and looked at your books, they might go, yeah, okay, you could do this a little bit differently. And it might save you a couple thousand, pounds on your personal tax every year. And you just need to change a couple of things about how you do these transactions. And if you just had an AI that could do that automatically and just come back and say, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. But if you just do it like that, you could save yourself a lot more money. I mean, I think the first person that can do that is really going to be, they're going to be on a winner, I think.
But I mean, you have these kind of emergent behaviors occurring all of the time when it comes to any kind of deep reinforcement learning agents and stuff like that. So, I mean, in this example of accountancy, it's not far-fetched to see how actually with enough context of global news and laws, you could predict, oh, well, there's a 60% chance that such and such law will be passed in the future, in which case actually your best bet is to take this thing based on the future which doesn't yet exist. Or in fact, why not? I'm just going to influence the laws.
Well, that's,
You have all sorts of unintended consequences that you need to be aware of and careful about.
100%. And it again, it all kind of comes back to, it's just like a human, none of us are perfect. The AI is not perfect. And that's because we're not perfect. It will never be perfect. And I guess the bigger view of it is that there is no perfect, because what I consider perfect and what you consider perfect are maybe two different things. So we get back to the kind of the content, the concept of emptiness in Buddhism, which is, an event is an event and it has no good or bad. So there is no, if, I don't know, Man U plays Man City and, if I'm a Man U fan and they win, then that's good for me and it's bad for you. But if Man City wins, that's good for you and bad for me. So it's an imperfect result for me and it's perfect for you, or vice versa. So it can never be perfect because in someone's eyes, it will be imperfect. So there is no such thing.
Even for the same individual, I mean, I usually think about it from the perspective of time. So, Man U wins, that's great for you. So you go out to the pub party, have one too many drinks and you get hit by a bus. That's bad for you. Actually, because you got hit by the bus, you didn't kill 3 people or whatever. Exactly. It goes on forever.
Wow, we've got quite deep here at the end. Didn't expect to go that far down the sort of philosophical rabbit hole. I love it.
I think that's why you have the idea of convergence, right? I think that at some point things simplify. Right now, I commonly use the example of you use ChatGPT to write you a cold email to a new potential customer. that new customer at some point will just spam filter everything out and distill the key points of what the email was in the first place. And so there's kind of, at some point, it will just become a case of transferring information as effectively as possible, I imagine.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it will converge, I guess, into the trying to think of how to say what I'm thinking. Yeah. If I have an AI who's helping me do something, and let's just use a B2B context to go with your example, right? So I have a podcast and I've got the AI helping me write a message to you saying, hey, I'd like you to be on the podcast. And you have an AI that's filtering all your email that's coming in. Then if my AI knows that you have an AI, then my AI is going to recommend a different format and a different way of saying it, because the way it needs to write it to get through your AI is different than it would be as if it was a human reading it. So,
and at some point, you can just assume that is the case.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question to follow up with.
So the same with deepfakes, right? You'll always have people deepfaking and deepfake detecting.
I've talked about, people talked about watermarking and all that sort of stuff in the past. And, my position is that as soon as somebody comes out with a watermarking tool, within 24 hours, somebody will come out with a tool that will remove the watermark. And you're just going to, again, it's going to be a Cold War and it's going to be a race to the bottom. But that's kind of how it is at the minute. People take photos that include, every photo has this stuff called EXIF data in it, which is the date and the time and all the settings and all that sort of stuff that the image was taken. That's in it's not super secret, but I would say the vast majority of people don't actually realize that information is there. But there are also tools that you can use to edit that EXIF information. So you can take a photo that was old and you can modify the date and the time that was taken to make it seem like it was new. So if you then uploaded that to, say, your WhatsApp or something, to, let's say you were up to some nefarious activity and you wanted to show that you were in a different location at a particular date and time, you could literally go in, edit the EXIF information about the image, and then upload that. And then you could point to it in court and say, but I took this picture at this location at this time. And for all intents and purposes, it would seem that image was taken at that place and time. So you can do that already, but just most people don't know about it. It's the dual use problem. Everything's good and everything's bad all at the same time. So we have to do the best that we can, I think, as we move forward. Talking to Yoop yesterday was quite interesting. And it's been rolling around in the back of my mind. And I think that maybe one of the solutions we have moving forward is that we have specialist AI tools only. So if you want to do maths, you can go to Wolfram and you can talk to their API and it will do all the mathematics for you. If you want you want to solve a chemistry problem, or you have a chemistry question or whatever, you've got a chemistry, AI that you can go to. Or if you have a writing problem or you have X or Y, you can go to those individual ones, but they're trained as specialists in their individual areas. I think where the risk comes in is that you get the general, it's that layer sitting on top, or the one that starts to incorporate all the different tools into one massive set. And I think, maybe if we just keep specialist tools as very narrow AI in a particular discipline, that we might be able to make it, because they won't be able to take over anything else. It's only where you get them where they have access to everything equally that I think it gets to be a problem. Don't know how I got on that. Right. I'm conscious of time. We've been chatting now for an hour. There's a bit to edit out, but that's okay. We'll do that in a minute. So any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think all this stuff is really interesting, because I think that it's going to have to force us to reevaluate what it means to be human, and also reevaluate what gives us purpose and what gives us drive. And I think not to bring it back to capitalism again, but to a large extent, I think capitalism has been a drive for a really long time and will continue to be a drive for a little while. But I do definitely see it reaching its end. Eventually, it's not going to be enough of a drive, simply because most of the things that we can do will be able to be replaced. But yeah, it's interesting. And also, I think it's interesting to think about whether or not it's something that's going to happen within our lifetimes or not. I think it's becoming more and more feasible that it will. Yeah.
Aaron?
Yeah, that's pretty much my conclusion on this. We'll have to see. I mean, there's so much that can be said, but again, like we were saying, it depends on how humans interact with it. Even if it is possible that we could reach a perfectly utopian singularity or whatever, whether or not certain people would want to allow that is also a different question. Capitalism benefits certain people a lot, and there's arguably a large motivator to keep it as such.
Yeah.
So that's also a factor.
Yeah, I think the economic discussion is a whole separate podcast. And I really want to do one. I'm looking for an economist to come on because, yeah, we can't go down that track right now. I don't have time. No, that's cool. So, right. Plug Choppity. Tell everybody where to find it, why they should use it.
Yeah, so you can find us at choppity.com and you should definitely use it. I mean, it's great for if you've got a video podcast. We know that it's a huge struggle to, handle doing the video editing and then also to handle doing the distribution. There's just so many things to do if you're an independent podcaster. And we just really want to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to run a podcast. So yeah, come and find us at choppity.com. And you can also drop us an email or a message if you're interested, choppity.com/contact. We really like hearing from people. So yeah.
Excellent. And I'll put links to everything in the show notes and
Cool.
on the Creatives with AI website as well. And just one final thought from me on that is I think it could also be really useful, not just for people who do podcasts, but anyone who does video content. And I think about like companies. I think there's a lot of companies that do things like record meetings and they record, phone calls and they record appearances at trade shows and all sorts of things. And I think a lot of them they're not video editors. They don't have the skills. They don't run podcasts. And they don't work with video content a lot. And I think, your tool could also be really valuable for them because if you've got somebody who maybe had a meeting or an all hands or something like that, and they just want an easy way to take and grab those clips out and then maybe share them around either the company or, to share information or to use on the company's website and Twitter feeds and all that sort of stuff, social content. It could be really useful for them as well. So if there's someone listening and you don't have a podcast, don't think that you can't use it. You could use it even if you just work at a company and you record meetings every once in a while and somebody said something really funny or particularly insightful. You can use it for that as well, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we even have stand-up comedians and, TED Talk guests and such using it to clip
there you go.
Content.
Yeah, perfect. Brilliant. Zara, Aaron, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you as well.
Thank you so much,
Thanks for having
David.
us.
All right, speak to you later. Okay, folks, that's a wrap on another amazing episode of Creatives with AI. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. If you want to stay up to date on how all things related to AI is impacting the creative industries, then be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever your favorite platform is. We're on them all. And follow us on social media. We're on mainly Twitter and LinkedIn, but we're the same handle everywhere, which is at Creatives with AI. We'd also really appreciate it if you could just take a minute to leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Those are our two main platforms, and it really helps other listeners find the show, and it also helps us get more popularity and more exposure. So it'd be amazing if you could help us with that. If you've got any questions, topic suggestions, guest recommendations, feel free to send us an email. The best email is hello@creativeswith.ai. or you can shoot us a message on social media. Either one is fine. We love hearing from all of you, and we can't wait to bring more exciting episodes in the future. And the best way we can do that is to get feedback from the audience and have the audience tell us who it is you'd like to hear from and what things you'd like us to ask and what topics you'd like us to talk about. So please use that. Let us know what you want to hear, and we'll do our best to get it for you. And last but not least, we'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor, Futurehead Limited, who make this podcast possible. Your support means the world to us, and we really appreciate it. So thanks very much. That's it for today. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay curious.